black man faces shocking racism at a restaurant, but the staff has no idea he's their CEO. When he reveals the truth, their reactions will leave you speechless. The day began like any other at one of the city's most popular high-end restaurants, Harvest and Hearth. Known for its modern ambiance and carefully curated menu, the restaurant was bustling with activity. Servers rushed from table to table, chefs shouted orders in the back, and the soft hum of polite conversation filled the air. Among the crowd, nobody noticed the black man walking in quietly through the front door. Clad in a plain hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, Marcus Wright didn't look like the owner of this upscale eatery. He blended into the background, just another face in the crowd. That was exactly his intention. As the CEO of a fast-growing restaurant chain, Marcus had built a reputation as a fair and hard-working leader. But today wasn't about leadership meetings or business strategy. He wanted to experience the restaurant like any other customer, raw, unfiltered, and unplanned. He believed this was the only way to truly understand the culture his team had created. But what Marcus didn't expect was the storm waiting for him. As he stepped inside, Marcus felt a flicker of unease when a pair of employees at the host stand glanced his way, their faces immediately stiffening. One leaned over to whisper something to the other. A subtle chuckle followed. Marcus hesitated but reminded himself to keep his role intact. Today he wasn't the CEO. He was just a customer. "Hi," Marcus said politely, offering a warm smile. "I'd like to grab a table for one, please." The hostess, a young woman with sharp features and an air of impatience, didn't bother looking up from her tablet. She sighed heavily, muttering under her breath, before addressing him in a tone laced with disdain. "We're busy right now," she said flatly. "Maybe try somewhere else." Marcus blinked in disbelief. Around him, several tables sat empty, and other guests were being seated without question. He took a breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "I don't mind waiting," he replied gently. "I'll just need a few minutes to look at the menu." The hostess rolled her eyes before glancing back at her co-worker. They exchanged a knowing smirk before the hostess crossed her arms. "We have a dress code, you know," she said, her voice dripping with condescension as her eyes raked over his casual attire. "You don't look like the kind of guy who can afford to eat here anyway." Her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. A mix of humiliation and anger stirred inside him, but he didn't let it show. Years of navigating boardrooms where he was often underestimated as a black man had taught him the value of restraint. He simply nodded, his jaw tightening, and quietly asked, "Is there a manager I can speak to?" The hostess raised an eyebrow, her demeanor growing colder. "Why? You think complaining is going to change anything?" she sneered. "You're wasting your time." Marcus glanced at the name tag pinned to her uniform. Stacy. He filed it away in his mind. Stacy's hostility was blatant, but the onlookers around him, diners and staff alike, did nothing. The silence in the room only amplified his growing disappointment. Marcus's heart tightened as Stacy dismissed him with a wave of her hand, her expression smug. He could feel the eyes of nearby diners glancing at him, though none dared to intervene. The weight of their silent judgment hung in the air. This wasn't the first time Marcus had faced prejudice, but experiencing it in a space he had poured his heart and soul into made it sting in a way he hadn't expected. Determined to keep his composure, Marcus cleared his throat. "I'd really like to speak to the manager." "Please," he said, his tone calm but firm. Stacy huffed loudly, grabbing the phone on the host stand. "Yeah, Pete," she said, her voice dripping with irritation. "Can you come out here? We've got a problem at the front." Within moments, a tall man in a crisp white shirt appeared from the back. Pete, the floor manager, walked with a slight swagger, his expression one of exasperation even before he reached the host stand. His eyes flicked to Marcus, narrowing slightly as he took in the scene. "What's going on here?" Pete asked, glancing between Stacy and Marcus. "This guy says he wants a table," Stacy said, rolling her eyes. I told him we're full, but he's being persistent. She said the last word, as though Marcus's request was a personal affront. Marcus extended his hand toward Pete. "Good afternoon," he said, trying to diffuse the tension. "I just wanted to grab a quick meal. I understand you're busy, but I noticed some open tables, so I thought I'd wait. I'm happy to be seated whenever it's convenient." Pete ignored Marcus's outstretched hand. Instead, he folded his arms across his chest and looked him up and down, his expression skeptical. "Look, we have a certain clientele here," Pete said, lowering his voice as if to be discreet, though his words carried an unmistakable undertone. "You don't exactly fit the bill. I don't want to waste your time, so maybe it's best if you try somewhere else." Marcus felt the heat rising in his chest. He could feel the familiar pang of frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior, but he forced himself to take a breath. Losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. "I see," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Are you saying I'm not welcome here?" Pete shrugged. "I'm saying we have standards. If you don't meet them, that's not my problem." Before Marcus could respond, another staff member, a young server with a nervous energy, approached the host stand. She looked at Marcus, then back at Pete, her brows furrowed in confusion. "Hey, Pete," she said cautiously. "That's, She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That's Mr. Wright." Pete's face paled slightly, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his features. "What are you talking about?" he muttered, glancing at the server. "Marcus Wright," she said, her voice firmer now. "The owner." Stacy let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "No way," she said, her tone dismissive. "This guy? You're kidding, right?" Marcus remained silent, letting the weight of the server's words settle over the group. Pete's gaze darted back to Marcus, studying him more carefully now, as though seeing him for the first time. The realization began to dawn, but Stacy was slower to catch on, her mocking smirk still firmly in place. "You expect me to believe this guy owns the restaurant," Stacy said, her voice loud enough to draw more attention from nearby diners. "Yeah, right." Marcus stepped forward, his calm demeanor masking the whirlwind of emotions churning within him. He locked eyes with Pete and spoke clearly, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "I'm Marcus Wright," he said, "founder and CEO of this restaurant. And right now, I'm trying very hard to understand how my staff thinks it's acceptable to treat anyone this way, let alone me." The color drained from Pete's face entirely, and Stacy's smirk vanished as if wiped away by an invisible hand. The dining room had grown eerily quiet, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. For a moment, the room seemed frozen in time. All eyes were on Marcus as his words echoed in the stunned silence. Pete's mouth opened and closed, as if struggling to form a coherent response. Stacy, on the other hand, stood rooted to the spot, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You're joking, right?" she finally stammered, her voice trembling now. "You can't. You're not." "I am," Marcus interrupted firmly, his gaze piercing. He took a step forward, his calm yet commanding presence silencing any further protests. "I'm the CEO of this restaurant, and this behavior is beyond unacceptable. Not just for me, but for any customer who walks through these doors." Pete's posture deflated, his bravado gone. "Mr. Wright, I didn't know," he stuttered, his tone suddenly deferential. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I thought—" "You thought what?" Marcus interjected, his voice sharp but controlled. "You thought you could judge someone based on how they look. You thought it was okay to demean a paying customer." Pete swallowed hard, glancing nervously around the room. The diners, who had been quietly watching the drama unfold, now exchanged whispers, their curiosity and judgment palpable. I apologize," Pete said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Marcus repeated, his tone incredulous. Is that what you call it? Let's be clear. What I just experienced wasn't a misunderstanding. It was blatant disrespect. And if this is how you treat people who don't fit the bill, I have to wonder how many others you've driven away with your prejudice. Stacy, who had been shrinking behind the host stand, suddenly found her voice. I didn't know who you were, she blurted out, as if that excused her actions. And that's exactly the problem, Marcus said, his gaze snapping to her. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with basic decency. Every single person who walks through that door deserves respect, whether they're wearing a three-piece suit or a hoodie and jeans. That's the standard I built this business on, and clearly it's a standard that's been forgotten. His words hung heavy in the air, and Marcus could see the shame beginning to seep into their expressions. Pete fidgeted uncomfortably, while Stacy looked as though she wanted to disappear. Marcus took a deep breath, softening his tone slightly, but keeping his resolve. I didn't create this restaurant just to serve good food. I created it to be a place where everyone feels welcome, no matter their background, their appearance, or their status. What I witnessed today is the complete opposite of that vision. Pete looked up, his voice shaky. Mr. Wright, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I didn't realize. Marcus held up a hand to stop him. You're right about one thing. You didn't realize. But now, you have the chance to do better. Both of you do. The question is, are you willing to take responsibility for your actions and change the way you think, the way you treat others? Pete nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment. Stacy hesitated, glancing between Marcus and Pete before giving a reluctant nod. Marcus studied them for a moment, then addressed the entire room. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here because I care about this place and the people in it. Change isn't easy, but it starts with accountability. And from this moment forward, things will change. The tension in the room began to shift. Some diners clapped quietly, offering encouraging smiles. Others watched in awe, clearly moved by Marcus's composure and the weight of his words. Marcus turned back to Pete and Stacy. We'll have a more formal conversation about this later, but for now, I'll leave you with this. Treat everyone with the dignity they deserve. No exceptions. With that, Marcus straightened, nodded at the staff member who had recognized him, and walked past the host stand toward an open table. He sat down, picked up the menu, and waited to see how they would respond next. As Marcus sat at the table, the weight of the confrontation still lingered in the air. The restaurant had gone quieter than usual, the staff and diners alike processing what had just unfolded. Marcus deliberately avoided eye contact, letting them absorb the gravity of the moment while he calmly studied the menu. Across the room, Stacy stood frozen behind the host stand. Her confident smirk had been replaced by a look of unease. She glanced at Pete, who was still staring at Marcus as though he had seen a ghost. The other staff members whispered among themselves in hushed tones, some sneaking glances in Marcus's direction, their faces filled with curiosity and guilt. It wasn't long before a waiter approached Marcus's table. Unlike Stacy and Pete, this young man seemed genuinely nervous, but determined to make things right. He wore a name tag that read Liam, and his hands trembled slightly as he set down a glass of water. Good afternoon, sir, Liam said softly, his voice just above a whisper. I'm, your server today. I'd like to apologize for what you experienced earlier. That's not who we are, or who we should be. Marcus looked up from the menu, his expression calm yet thoughtful. Thank you, Liam, he said. Apologies are important, but actions speak louder. I'll be keeping an eye on how you treat the rest of your guests today. Liam nodded, his face flushing red. Yes, sir. I'll make sure everyone is taken care of. As Liam walked away, Marcus noticed Stacy shifting uncomfortably at the host stand. For the first time, her confident facade had cracked, and she now looked visibly shaken. Pete approached her, speaking in a low tone. but she shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Meanwhile, at the nearby tables, the diners began to whisper more openly. A middle-aged couple sitting near Marcus leaned toward each other, the woman murmuring, "I had no idea he was the owner." "Neither did they," her husband replied, nodding toward Stacy and Pete. "It's embarrassing, honestly. They should have treated him better from the start." At another table, a young man tapped away on his phone, no doubt crafting a tweet or post about the dramatic scene he had just witnessed. Marcus could already picture the headlines, "Black CEO calls out racism in his own restaurant." But it wasn't just the staff and guests who were affected by the moment. One of the line cooks, a woman named Rosa, peeked out from the kitchen. She had overheard the confrontation and couldn't help but feel inspired. "He handled that with so much grace," she whispered to her colleague as they plated dishes. "If I were him, I don't think I'd have kept my cool." Her co-worker nodded. "That's what a real leader does, though. He didn't lash out. He made a point. A lot of people needed to hear that today." A few minutes later, Pete approached Marcus's table, his hands nervously clasped in front of him. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tentative humility. "Mr. Wright," he began, his voice unsteady. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't realize who you were, but that's no excuse for how I acted. Marcus held up a hand, stopping Pete mid-sentence. "Pete, let me ask you something," he said, leaning forward slightly. "If I weren't the CEO, if I were just an ordinary customer, would you still be apologizing right now?" Pete opened his mouth but hesitated, the question catching him off guard. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. "Probably not," he admitted quietly. "And that," Marcus said, his voice firm but not unkind, "is exactly what needs to change. Your respect for people shouldn't depend on their title or what they can do for you. It should be unconditional." Pete nodded, his face reddening. "You're right. Thank you for calling me out. I promise I'll do better." "I hope you will," Marcus replied, his tone softening. "Not just for me, but for every person who walks through those doors. This restaurant is bigger than one moment. It's about the values we stand for, and those values start with you." As Pete walked away, Marcus noticed Stacy hesitating at the host stand, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She glanced his way, but the look on her face was conflicted, part guilt, part defiance. Marcus made a mental note to address her actions in more detail later, but for now he let her stew in the weight of her own behavior. By the time Marcus finished his meal, the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted entirely. Staff members moved more attentively, their interactions with customers noticeably warmer and more genuine. Diners seemed more engaged, the earlier tension replaced by a quiet reverence for what they had witnessed. As Marcus prepared to leave, he called Liam over. "You've been great," Marcus said, offering a small smile. "Keep that attitude and you'll go far in this industry." Liam's face lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Wright. That means a lot." Marcus stood, glancing once more at Stacy and Pete, who watched him from a distance. "Tell the rest of the staff this. I'll be back soon. And next time, I won't come undercover. Let's see how things look when everyone knows I'm watching." With that, Marcus walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a room full of people deeply affected by the lessons he had delivered. Days turned into weeks, but the events of that afternoon at Harvest and Hearth continued to ripple through the restaurant. Word of Marcus Wright's undercover visit spread quickly, both among the staff and throughout the community. The story took on a life of its own, shared in whispers between employees, posted on social media, and even covered by a few local news outlets. For many, it became a stark reminder of the importance of dignity and respect, no matter who a person appeared to be. Back at the restaurant's headquarters, Marcus sat in his office, reflecting on the changes he'd put in motion. In the aftermath of his visit, he had made it a priority to ensure that the lessons from that day were not forgotten. Pete and Stacy were among the first to feel the weight of his resolve. Both employees were called into one-on-one meetings with Marcus. Pete, still shaken from the confrontation, admitted his mistakes and expressed a genuine desire to change. Marcus gave him a chance to prove himself, placing him on a probationary period and requiring him to attend mandatory training on diversity and customer service. Pete, Marcus had told him during their meeting, a mistake doesn't define you. What defines you is how you choose to grow from it. Show me that you're capable of better, and you'll earn back the trust you lost. Stacy's meeting, however, had been more difficult. While she had reluctantly apologized during the confrontation, her attitude during their conversation revealed deeper issues. "Mr. Wright," she had said, "I didn't mean anything personal. I didn't think someone like you would be—" She trailed off, realizing too late how her words sounded. "Someone like me," Marcus had repeated, his tone calm but firm. "Let me be clear, Stacy. That kind of thinking has no place in this business, or anywhere else. If you can't see people for who they are beyond their appearance, this may not be the job for you." In the end, Stacy had been let go. It wasn't a decision Marcus took lightly, but he knew that for the culture of the restaurant to truly change, accountability had to be enforced. Meanwhile, the rest of the staff underwent mandatory training sessions focusing on empathy, inclusivity, and the values that Marcus had built the business on. He personally attended the first session, standing before the employees as he delivered a message that left a lasting impression. "This restaurant is more than a business," Marcus said, addressing the room. "It's a reflection of the community we serve. Every guest who walks through those doors, whether they're wearing designer clothes or a hoodie, deserves to feel valued. And if we can't deliver that, then we've failed." The room was silent as Marcus continued. "But I believe in this team. I believe that we can be better. And I promise you this. I'll do everything in my power to make sure this place lives up to the values we claim to stand for. That work starts with all of us." Months later, the changes were undeniable. Pete had not only completed his probation, but had become one of the strongest advocates for the restaurant's new direction. He personally mentored new hires, ensuring they understood the importance of treating every customer with respect. Liam, the nervous young server who had waited on Marcus that day, flourished under the new leadership. He became a team leader, known for his kind demeanor and unwavering dedication to creating a welcoming environment for every guest. Even the regular diners noticed the transformation. "The energy here feels different now," one frequent customer remarked during a conversation with Marcus. "It's warmer, more genuine. You can feel it in the way the staff carries themselves." But the biggest change of all was in the community. The story of Marcus's undercover visit had resonated with so many people because it highlighted an issue that often went unspoken. It wasn't just about one restaurant or one act of discrimination. It was about the broader need for empathy, understanding, and accountability. Marcus found himself invited to speak at local events and schools, sharing the lessons he had learned as a Black CEO, navigating a world that often judged him unfairly. His message was simple, yet powerful. Change starts with how we choose to see each other. It starts with respect, one person at a time, one interaction at a time. On the anniversary of the restaurant's founding, Marcus returned to Harvest and Hearth for a quiet dinner. This time, he didn't come undercover. He walked in as himself, greeted warmly by Liam at the door. The once cold atmosphere was gone, replaced by a buzz of energy and kindness. As Marcus took his seat, Pete approached with a wide smile. "Mr. Wright," he said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you again. Thank you for giving me the chance to do better." Marcus shook his hand firmly, his eyes reflecting both pride and gratitude. "You've earned it, Pete. Keep it up." As Marcus looked around the room, seeing the staff working together and the diners enjoying their meals, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, but the transformation was worth every moment. This wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a symbol of what was possible when people were willing to confront their biases, take responsibility, and commit to change. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a small smile on his face as he watched the bustling dining room. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace, knowing that his vision had become a reality and that the story of Harvest and Hearth was far from over.